Hello, my name is Lucas, and today I'm joined by Bree, Christian, and Armando, some of the artists featured in the Master of Fine Arts thesis exhibition, This, That, and the Other Thing. The show is currently on view at Urban Arts Space until March 19th, and the show exhibits the culminating work of the MFA students from The Ohio State University Department of Art over 3 years. For more information, please visit us at our website at uas.osu.edu/events. To start off with, could you tell us a little about yourself and your work in the show, as well as your area of focus within the program?
Yeah, I can start. My name is Christian Casas. I'm in the sculpture department, and I'm also receiving a minor in interdisciplinary Latin American studies within the Spanish and Portuguese department. Specifically, the work that I have for the thesis exhibition is entitled The Classroom, which is composed of multiple parts, a series of pyrograph alphabet boards adorned to the walls, remnants of flashcards marketed towards children, a bookshelf housing an array of literature. But really, this idea of the classroom is inviting viewers to learn more aptly and unlearn institutional paradigms rooted in histories of colonialism as well as enslavement.
I am in the MFA program, obviously, in the Department of Art, and my area of focus is in glass. And my work for the exhibition is everything is a monochrome of yellow, and it's a combination of an installation as well as glass elements, paint on the wall, and tufted rugs. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I got kind of back into making some textile work. And so that's why the rugs are appearing here. And the work's kind of thematically around kind of ideas surrounding gender and queerness and queer phenomenology. And queer phenomenology focuses on our relationship, our body's relationships to the spaces that we encounter. And so the work is kind of focused on how our body fits into space and how kind of bodily forms can be represented in the compositions in different ways in space.
Hi, my name is Armando Roman. I am in the photography department or in the photography area. And the work on view at the show right now is an installation of 7 drawings and about 2,000 pieces of construction paper taped to a wall, which is rooted in my interest in kind of dealing with Catholicism as a queer person and kind of navigating the kind of duality of the kind of painful but also really enjoyable experience of participating in religion and wanting to replicate that anxiety through the form of an installation.
Right. How do you find inspiration when creating your works?
So I think for me, it's a lot about looking into myself. I think personally, throughout the last 3 years, I've had the privilege to sort of not have to worry about money or other external factors. So grad school has allowed me this time to sort of acknowledge my own cultural identity and even engage in some more personal components for myself in regard to healing trauma or holding yourself accountable. And so I think for me, the work has been sort of this unearthing, and I think also this interweaving of history and memory. And I think as I've done this work, it's starting to open up the kind of research and the kind of content that I'm making. This time last year, I was focusing on Cuba and the last 70 years of Cuban migration. And through that research, I'm sort of now opening up this larger context to the work and relating the Caribbean diaspora to the Middle Passage, and sort of more so the long-standing side effects of Spanish colonialism, but also the intergenerational trauma that we get passed on from our family, and sort of how there needs to be healing, right? And there needs to be understanding. as a way not only for the individual to find a place of joyous happiness and of hope, but also as hopefully as an opportunity to facilitate a space, an opportunity for others to be able to heal or acknowledge things possibly that they've been indifferent to. So that's I guess that's the most long-winded way I can say that's how I get inspiration for my work.
Great. That's really interesting. Do you think there are kind of meta conversations to be had with those engaging in your work in relation to the experiences of certain communities, or even those who don't have these specific experiences?
I think the work is for everyone, right? I think with the kind of model that I'm sort of using within my work, it's within this idea of reciprocity, right? Equal reciprocity, that I'm willing to give and hold my hand out and trying to allow this space for equity where I'm trying to take other people's hands and bring them into a space to possibly encounter things that they didn't know about, or maybe even defamiliarize and recontextualize their own understanding of, for example, the history of colonialism, or even what it means to be Hispanic or Latin right now.
Armando, could you speak about your inspirations as well?
Yeah, I get a lot of inspiration from my family. I think the bulk of my work just stems from either conversations with my family or with my therapist, to be honest, learning new things about myself or new kind of ways of thinking that don't really come up in everyday, conversation, more so when having really personal conversations with family or with someone who's asking you really kind of just questions about yourself. And so I take a lot of inspiration from that. And also as a child of immigrants, I think I have a really kind of strange relationship to the physical landscape where my parents are from, to Mexico. So I get a lot of inspiration through looking at images online, photos that were sent to me by my family back in Mexico, or really more recently, just looking at tourist photographs to really understand and place what my what my role is within the physical Mexican landscape.
Bree, sorry, could you speak about your inspirations?
Yeah, I think fundamentally a lot of my work is inspired through the process of making. And so for myself, I've kind of known for a long time that making is a big part of who I am, and the desire to like go into the studio and like grind and produce something is really kind of like the forefront of it. And then kind of what's transitioned in my time in grad school is that I've been thinking more about how my relationship to the studio and to spaces that I encounter can be represented in the work. And so some of the current work is inspired by like this idea that, or this moment where I found that my body didn't fit the glass blowing studio specifically. And I found that the tools didn't fit my hand and the equipment didn't fit my body because of it being female versus male. And so a lot of the equipment is based on the proportions of the male body. And so some of this kind of stuff that's coming out in space and with the notion of our body in relation to space are based on my own personal experiences in the studio and through like walking through life. And so the work in the show right now is kind of a lot inspired by the Tex Avery cartoon of Little Red Riding Hood, which is where the classic Auga wolf meme comes from. And so that kind of like playfulness, but also kind of discussing the kind of issues as well related to the wolf jutting his eyes out at Little Red Riding Hood.
Right, right. You spoke about using the space. How do you think your work ties into the space given to you at Urban Art Space? Armando, you as well, when you mentioned Catholicism. Do you think that ties into your work as well?
Yeah, I think the space at Urban Art Space is really unique architecturally, and there's a lot of opportunity for architectural engagement within the space. And so I wanted to kind of use the space I was given in a way that I haven't used the space at Urban Art Space in the past. And so I'm making kind of like two flattened giant eyeballs that are jutting across the space. And yeah, they're obviously yellow, but they kind of attach to one of the columns and appear like they're going through the column. And so kind of playing with the architecture that's already present and the hard lines versus the soft lines.
Right.
Okay, Armando, Catholicism.
Great. Yeah, I think the space was really important in kind of conveying this message of this like simultaneous warmness, but also constriction that I wanted to kind of emulate in the space with my relationship to how I feel about religion as a whole. So it's three walls that are completely covered in colored paper that are I think for me they're really interesting to look at for a while, but then it starts to get a little uncomfortable and a little almost kind of itchy. I think it's a really kind of interesting space, urban art space, and the space that I have too. I was specifically interested in replicating a church reliquary, a place where kind of sacred items are found. So the three kind of wall space with work that kind of references visually to stained glass is really kind of important in getting that read in the work.
Christian, I know that yours does something as well, but with all the moving parts, how do you move through the space?
Yeah. So I guess for me, I tried to think about the space not so much as like an institutional building that's going to house an exhibition that I've done while in an academic space. I was trying to figure out how do I actually transform the space into a classroom, right? How do I actually not use models and conventions within art in art history, but how do I sort of call on these pedagogies that I'm trying to sort of address? So thinking about sort of the open classroom model, right? Where learning doesn't just happen in one specific area, but the classroom is arranged in such a way where learning and information can sort of be scaffolded and sort of, I think the viewer has that option as well, where the exhibition space for my installation sort of becomes this classroom where they can spend some time to learn, hang out, draw, read, play, imagine, hope, as well as like address, you know, these sort of very heavy ideas of colonialism and sort of erasure and how even sort of how the most foundational components of our lives, like the education system, at times sort of are working against our own well-beings.
Right. How does your work in the exhibition reflect the culmination of your experience at your time in the MFA program, as well as just in general throughout the past few years?
The work is kind of a response to a lot of the experiences that I've had, particularly with individual professors, or I guess I would say with even just certain feelings that I've had where there is an indifference to difference. And I think part of that was me realizing that I needed to sort of spread my roots, not only within OSU, but also the community, right? If I'm going to be working and talking about the Hispanic community, then I should be speaking and talking to those folks within the space. So I think sort of realizing that there's a certain wall or barrier or even a limit to people's information due to their own identity or background, that that I needed to sort of spread out, right? Spread out into the community and then spread out into the Latin department, to art history, to African American studies. So the work has been really great that it's allowed me to blossom and to and feel like I have some more sustainability within my work, in the sense that I'm not only talking about these ideas within an art context, but now that I have this sort of larger context, but also sort of even framework or understanding to this knowledge, because I didn't get to it through art history, but it was through sort of these other kind of frameworks that feel helpful to me, that at times I felt limited to access.
So it's interesting to see what comes out of different contexts. Bria and Armando, do you have similar experiences, or how do you feel your work has culminated over the past few years?
Well, COVID happened. And so originally, like I said early in the meeting, I was in the photography area, or still I'm in the photography area, I should say. And I would make a lot of documentary photography work around my family, which meant having to travel quite often to and from Chicago, where they currently are. And when travel became very limited, I had to really stop and think about what it means to have a studio practice, which, as a photographer who is like moving so often, is something that I really never was able to grapple with for long periods of time. So I really thought about using drawing and painting as a medium to still make work about my family. And, I was kind of not restricted to the kind of politics in the realm of the real that photography, specifically documentary photography, has to kind of grapple with, or what photographers have to grapple with. So I was really kind of able to let that go and kind of be a lot more fantastical, speculative with my thinking, with my making, and also with my choice of materials, and combining, both digital work using an iPad, a tablet, and then, using paints and pastels has really kind of allowed me to scramble, I think, but in a really productive way.
It's interesting to see how creating shifts over time, and I'm sure Bree have experienced that as well. Could you speak about that?
Yeah, I think similar to Armando, like COVID had a big impact on the last kind of 3 years and my time here at OSU, and kind of transitioned my practice into being more interdisciplinary than just focused in glass. And I think, like, because I started working in this newer fashion of thinking about space and installations in this way during my time here in grad school, it kind of because it's in this fashion, in a way, it's like a culmination of those thoughts and all those things.
So when you're being introduced to your work to someone who's viewing or engaging in it, do you think parts of your identity and the messages that you're trying to convey has shifted over the past few years?
I would say yeah. I think like Armando, right? I'm sort of not to say that every Hispanic has the same experience, but sort of you start to think about your family, you start to think about your relationship to them, and sort of how they have affected you, and even how they got to their own point of context as well. So I guess the pandemic, it was the most helpful in the sense of just having time with the work without really having any other voices, right? It was just me having this conversation with myself about myself, kind of this like schizophrenic fever dream, but in a way that I think has felt helpful in both like an interpersonal way, and I think also just like a personal, like mentally health wise. And I think for viewers, a lot of the work, people are aware of where these icons or where these images come from as far as their origin, whether it's in relationship to Cuba, in relationship to Latin history, in relationship to activism. But I'm giving an opportunity for people who don't have that point to sort of have an opportunity to learn, right? And I think also not trying to pander as well, and giving the folks who already have an understanding perhaps of colonial history another opportunity to fully engage their own understanding of what it sort of means within this sort of larger history, right? So I'm trying to the way that I've usually dealt with my work is that I'm always trying to teach people or I'm always trying to give them some information because I feel lucky to have it. But now I realize that to sort of fill someone else's cup, I have to fill my own, right? So this idea of reciprocity, equal reciprocity, the pushing and pulling that relationship between the viewer and the work, I feel is really important.
Right. Armando, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in thinking about, I guess maybe this is kind of a bit more broadly a question of audience, but I think when I was making or when I make a work, I think I kind of make it a rule for myself to make and make work that is kind of understandable for my mother and father. So like, can somebody kind of look at this work and have no background in art or interest in art really, and still kind of understand what is happening? But something more recently that I really had to come to terms with, especially with this body of work in general, is sometimes my kind of unwillingness or maybe fear of kind of talking about work in relationship to queerness. And I think a lot of that has to do with specifically growing up in a very religious way. So I think opening up these conversations of queerness, both in terms of sexuality, sexual orientation, but also in kind of thinking of queerness as a disruptive kind of act, is something that is actually quite new for me, and something that I think I've kind of eluded purposefully for a long time.
Bree, you mentioned that your work also deals with conversations about gendered forms and queerness. And with your relationship to making, do you think that has also shifted at all?
Yeah, I think maybe like thoughts on it have shifted more just independently, like not related to COVID, but I think that over the last couple years, like personally I've started to come more to terms with like my own identity and who I see myself as and who I want others to see myself as. And so in a lot of ways the work is paralleling a lot of those feelings and thoughts. And so I'm kind of playing a lot of times with different gendered forms and different elements of them and kind of like pushing them together and confusing them. So sometimes something will look phallic, but it will also look like breasts or eyeballs and kind of playing with that fluidity within the work as well. Yellow is also the stereotypical color you paint a baby's room when you don't know its gender. And so part of my decision to make an all yellow monochrome for this show was kind of based off some of those kinds of principles of thinking about color in relationship to gender and to our kind of connotations that we place on color.
Moving forward, as artists who are constantly exploring the boundaries of art, could you speak about how your process may change in the future, especially moving from an academic setting?
I think I'm really excited about the prospect of not having so much buzzing in my ear with like what academia is, to really kind of think on my own and to really, I won't speak for being Christian, but sometimes I wonder about maybe the originality of my ideas after having, hundreds of visits to faculty, like really thinking about what exactly has been of my own sort of thinking and what has been kind of useful, or not in conversations with others. So I'm kind of looking forward to that in the future. And also, I mean, practically speaking, the work in the show, for example, is like quite large. So I'll have to think of kind of creative ways to wrestle with that and to think about scale in the future, while not necessarily immediately having access to a studio or to large, excuse me, to large facilities.
That's interesting, speaking about critiques with faculty. And I often think about how much of my work is my own and how much is, comes from a place that's not original. But Bria and Christian.
Yeah, I guess I too am going to mourn the loss of the academic sort of facilities and resources. But I think within that same breath of Armando, I think not having to answer any sort of like questions about who the work is for, or even sort of having to have these side tasks feels somewhat liberating, where I think the only factor is just about making the work, right? Once I leave here, I just get to make the work, where I think now it feels like there's so much labor after making the work that at times doesn't feel useful, either because the system is antiquated in a way where it's not thinking about equity and how others might be experiencing or navigating their practice, or sort of even their own bodies while in this institutional space. So I sort of see it as this double-sided sword, sort of mourning, as well as sort of a bit of joy as well.
Bree?
I think some of my thoughts parallel with Armando and Christian as well. But I do think I will miss some aspects of the conversations with faculty. I think that parts of them sometimes can be exhausting, but at other times can be really fruitful. And so I think I will miss that aspect, and also the aspect of working in a kind of community studio space. I think in the last year, specifically for me, in kind of this like post-pandemic whatever space, it's been nice again to kind of be working in the studios alongside the undergraduate population. And so because in Glass, everything is so oriented and having to be in the physical space together, it's been really nice again to find myself in the hot glass studio with beginning glass students, and to find myself in the cold shop with beginning glass students, and kind of like seeing their raw love and nature for the material, and getting back to a bit of its ooey gooey qualities. And so I think I'm gonna miss the beginners the most of everyone, because they just get so excited about everything. And so I think yeah, I'm also excited to find out what's next, and to do new things, but I'm also going to miss kind of being in the glass shop with the beginners just like drooling over the material.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? What excites you guys about the Columbus art scene?
I can talk first this time. I think I've had like quite a few unique experiences here in Columbus, and one of them was doing a summer series show down here at Urban Art Space. And one of the things that I found that I really loved about the Columbus scene during that show is that, you know, I reached out to lots of different curators and artists and people running different spaces to come and visit with us through the exhibition, and have these kind of like smaller studio visits within the show. And I found people to be really accommodating and wanting to see and wanting to hear from me. And I found that in other places I've lived, it's been really hard to, you know, contact the curators at a place like the CMA, or contact the curators at the WEX. And in Columbus specifically, I found that everyone's really open to it. And, you know, including like the Ohio Arts Council, as well as Greater Columbus Arts Council. And so there's kind of some opportunities here for support in ways that I haven't found in other cities. And one of the big ones is the GCAC, the Greater Columbus Arts Council, and kind of the programs that Ohio Arts has, as well as the Cultural Arts Center downtown here in Columbus. They have some amazing accessible programming for people and accessible workshops. And so I think there are some unique opportunities here. And so that's kind of my favorite part is that everyone's pretty accepting and wanting to hear from you and wanting to open up the conversation. Less gatekeeping.
I think for myself, I'm really excited about sort of the alternative art scene, sort of the artist run spaces. And I think also sort of the amount of space that there is for others to create and facilitate their own experiences. Something after I graduate, which sort of a self-plug here, but the Columbus Alternative Art Book Fair will be happening sort of in the summer. And just the idea that myself and Brett Davis, we were sitting in a room talking about this 2 months ago, and now we're sort of filling out the permits to have it at Wineland Park, is a really great feeling, in the sense that not only is there artists who need this kind of support, but that the community is so willing to provide these spaces for groups that in the past have been marginalized, and sort of acknowledging that, right, this space needs to be made, and perhaps there is some resources that we can provide for not just the conventional sort of gallery or professional art experience, but for people who either are doing art as a way of just trying to get through life, or perhaps they're working in such an unconventional way that there is no space for them yet, right? Because it's so transformative of what's currently already here.
To kind of echo what Bree and Christian are both saying, I think people here are really willing to collaborate, but also fund. I mean, speaking very pragmatically, right? There's opportunities available for you to kind of secure funding to do things like this. And the really interesting thing about Columbus, just architecturally speaking, and with how the city is laid out, is most of these artist-run spaces or even smaller galleries are public facing in really interesting ways. And I think those are really interesting challenges for artists to understand how, barring the, kind of greater institution of Ohio State or CCAD or, whatever, like your work exists in communities. And I think more often than not, a lot of times artists are really excited by that and thinking of ways to really engage with community in Columbus.
Oh, it's good to hear that there's opportunities out there, and things moving forward with increasing access and things like that. To close, is there anything else you would like to add, or any parting words for future graduates, students under the art department?
Statistically speaking, this is going to be the time in our art careers where people care about our work the most.
Mm-hmm.
So I really encourage everybody, both current and like future students of the program, to be incredibly selfish with their practice and to really reach out, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but like 5 times to faculty, to members in the community, to really get the most out of your experience here, because it goes by really fast. And with an institution as large as Columbus, or with OSU, and as with a city with as many opportunities in Columbus, it sometimes feels very overwhelming knowing where to begin. But I think that is the most exciting part about establishing our practice here.
And I think for myself, sort of reminding myself as well as my students as I'm teaching now, that your life as an artist or as an academic or whatever it is sort of an endurance race, right? There is no point where you're supposed to be success or sort of have sustainability. What we're doing is an endurance race, and there's always work to be done, right? And that is both daunting as well as exciting for the possibilities for the future ahead.
Yeah, I think a bit of a parallel on Christians there is that, like, we all feel the self-doubt at times and the insecurities, and to remind yourself that everyone else is also struggling with those. Nobody just made their work and it was amazing and they didn't have any weird feelings about it whatsoever. And so yeah, just to keep doing and keep pushing, and to get yourself in the space of making, whatever that is, if it's the studio, if it's going on a walk, if it's your apartment, if it's traveling, whatever it is that like gets you in that mind frame and inspires you, just go do it, and don't care. Don't look back. I think that's kind of the biggest piece of advice I could give to all the undergrads and future graduate students is, just keep going on it, and don't be afraid to make bad things. Someone told me in my first year of grad school that I should be making the work where I'm just peeing in the corner embarrassingly. And I like full-heartedly believe that. Like, pee in the corner for a year, like figure some shit out, take some risks. If you don't take any risks, then everything just stays the same. And is that really, I don't know, like for me, I'm like, is that really what I want to be doing? Do I want to make the same work for 3 years? Or would I rather take some challenges and some risks and progress? And so don't be afraid to pee in the corner.
Thank you all for speaking us today. For our viewers, for more information about the show and the artist, please visit our website at uas.osu.edu.